Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Banyan Impact Fellowship info session of today. It's actually our last info session before the application deadline on February 20th. So this is a great opportunity for you to ask your questions and learn about the program and the application process. Very happy to have Hamsini with me here today. You see Hamsini also on the screen. Hamsini is a fellowship alumna. She graduated from the program last year and very happy to have her here. She would also like to share her experience with the fellowship, and later on she will also be here for the Q&A session. So whether you joined via LinkedIn or YouTube, feel free to add your questions in the chat, and then we will either address them when we go along or at the end in the Q&A session. So yeah, welcome again. A little bit about the structure. We will have some slides for you. I promise to keep it short, just to give you a little overview over the program and the application. Then we will have Hamsini sharing some of her experience, and and then we will address your questions. So let's jump in. So the Banyan Impact Fellowship Program is from the American India Foundation, and the organization, the American India Foundation, is committed to improving the lives of India's underprivileged, with a special focus on women, children, and youth. And the programs of the American India Foundation are in education, livelihoods, and public health. Our fellowship program is AIF's oldest program. It has been implemented at the very beginning when the organization was founded in 2001. And it has also expanded in scope and developed and changed a bit over the years. In the very beginning, it was a disaster relief program. So the first fellows who actually came to India from the US served in disaster relief projects. And over the years, this has expanded in scope. Nowadays, the fellows work in various different thematic areas. And the cohorts also consist not only of American fellows, but of American fellows and Indian fellows. Over the years, there has been a growing network of alumni. Overall, we have an alumni community of 539 fellows who have served at different host organizations in India, a total of 238 partner organizations, and across 25 states in India. Our motto is serve, learn, lead. So what we mean by that is that through service on the ground, serving civil society organizations in India and working closely with communities on the ground, this is the service aspect, which actually also has a learning experience for the fellows. And through this learning experience, we will also improve the leadership skills of our fellows. The program is a 10 months immersive volunteer service program starting in October. And the thematic areas that you see here, education, livelihoods, and public health, are the three main thematic areas. However, as I already mentioned, the fellows actually work in various different thematic areas. The cohort consists of both American and Indian fellows, and the intercultural exchange component is actually very important to us at the American India Foundation. We do not only have a focus on India's underprivileged and improving their lives, but also the intercultural exchange between India and the US, and the bridge building aspect between the two democracies. And this is how our fellowship program actually contributes to this aspect of our mission very well, because it brings together young professionals from both countries in this fellowship program. The fellows, together with their host organizations, create projects that are scalable, replicable, and sustainable. What is meant by this is also that the effect and the impact that those projects have on the host organization and the host communities does not only refer to the 10 months of service, but ideally also has an effect beyond these 10 months, and something that we are also very happy about when we are in touch with our alumni is that they actually report to us that they are still in touch with each other, with their host communities and organizations that they used to serve. So there's actually a long relationship starting with this fellowship. The thematic areas, as I mentioned, are actually widespread. Besides education, public health, and livelihoods, there are projects in climate justice, environment protection, arts and culture, minority rights, technology, LGBTQ rights, women rights. And as it's usually the case in the development sector, these thematic areas also overlap. So many of the projects can not only be assigned to one of these areas, but to several. And it is up to our fellows and host organizations who they would like to work with. I'm talking a bit more about their matching process in a bit, but it is actually based on our fellows' interest, what kind of projects they would like to work in. This is a list of some of the benefits that our fellows get when joining the fellowship program. So it's a fully funded program, meaning that our fellows receive a living stipend that is covering the living costs in India. The American India Foundation covers the visa and travel expenses. Our fellows also get a health insurance and access to mental health counseling if needed. We provide language trainings for our fellows. This is something maybe worth mentioning, that not in all of our projects specific language skills are needed. All of our fellows are required to speak English. However, in some projects, we would also need a specific language that the respective fellow knows. However, this is oftentimes, if it's a local language, this is oftentimes the case that then this project will be matched with a fellow from India. However, we also offer these language trainings not only for those projects where an additional language is needed, but also for our fellows who are interested in language training and also to better connect with the host communities on the ground. And this can be several languages. Local languages, of course, make sense depending on the area where the fellow is placed. In the current cohort, we have one fellow who's learning Indian Sign Language, for instance, and we have a variety of languages to choose from here. The fellows also enjoy our mentoring programs. We have different mentors, not only from the fellowship team do we have assigned mentors for each fellow, but also we have a so-called senior fellow track. The senior fellows are seasoned professionals from within India's development sector, who also serve as mentors for our fellows. They have regular check-in calls with them. They organize curated sessions on different topics and technical skills. And then, of course, also at the host organization, our fellows have an assigned supervisor and a mentor there with whom they will meet on a regular basis. We also provide professional development opportunities. Our fellows can also do site visits. They can visit each other at the different organizations and also participate in conferences. These are some competitive grants that we also have where fellows can apply for. And for professional development, we also collaborate with Atlas Corps in the Virtual Leadership Institute, where our fellows do not only get in touch with other young professionals from the US and India, but from all over the world and working together on shared projects. There are a lot of networking opportunities. I already mentioned our senior fellows who are very well connected in India and also the US. So not only through them, but also several conferences over the course of the fellowship that we provide, where we invite keynote speakers and experts from the field. And of course, also within the American India Foundation and our staff, there's lots of opportunities to network and also get benefits for your career trajectory. We just recently launched our new alumni platform, which is also a great way to connect with others from certain careers, for instance, and where you can actually get in touch with alumni from the past 23 years. There's also a job board on this alumni platform. So we like to stay in touch with our alumni and also support them not only throughout the fellowship, but also beyond. Here are some testimonials. I will keep it short because, again, we are happy to have Hamsini here today, and she can share live and firsthand from her experience. This is Erin. She was actually from the same cohort as Hamsini, graduating last year. She was with the host organization in Jaipur in Rajasthan called EcoRep, and she was working together with rural women in projects that would focus on upcycling. So they were using waste materials, and the fellows project was about designing products out of these waste materials that would then be made together with these women and would help them with their livelihood opportunities and also this environmental component of waste management. So a very exciting project. And yeah, maybe an interesting side note here is also that Erin actually, after the fellowship, joined her host organization, and she's now the director of this very project. So sometimes our candidates also ask us what fellows do after the fellowship. There are many various ways. Some fellows actually stay in India, as Erin did, or they start their own organizations. Others will do another degree, for instance, a master degree or a PhD program. Many stay in the development sector. Others go into the corporate sector. So there are various ways, but typically the fellowship actually helps them and is yeah, a great addition to your CV and when applying for opportunities post-fellowship. This is Maitreyi. Her project was in education. She's a 2018 alumna, and I like her citation here. The fellowship taught me leadership in a way I couldn't have imagined and gave me friends and a network of organizations that I couldn't have met otherwise. The fellowship introduces you to mirrors and windows, mirrors to reflect on and windows to leap through, learning to stretch you out of your comfort zone. And yeah, I find this very crucial as a testimonial, because many of our alumni actually share with us also that this is a very special time in their lives. It is a time where you get out of your comfort zone. Obviously, you will have new experiences, new situations. You will be in new places, learn new languages. And this can be challenging, but it's also a great learning experience and something that our alumni consistently have called a life-changing experience. Here are some of the very basic selection criteria. In order to be eligible for our program, the candidates need to be either US citizen or Indian citizen or permanent resident of the United States. They need to be between 21 and 35 years of age, and they need to have a minimum of a bachelor's degree. Of course, we also expect our candidates to be open to get out of their comfort zone and being eager to learn together with the host communities. The idea is really to learn on the ground, to exchange skills and knowledge, and to develop solutions together. And that our candidates are also committed to positive and sustainable change and the US-India bridge building. A little bit about the application process and the structure. So it's a two-stage application process, meaning that right now we receive the written applications after this stage, and the deadline is February 20th. We will obviously go through all of these applications and invite shortlisted candidates for an interview. That's the second stage. And those ones that go through the interview round will then enter the so-called matching stage, which is a stage where our selected candidates and also the host organizations that have applied with project proposals will get access to each other's profiles. And then based on their interests, we will facilitate meetings and interviews between them. And then the candidates and also our host organizations will let us know who they would like to work with. And this is how the matching works. Obviously, we cannot always promise in this stage that everyone would get their first choice. But it is a system where we can make sure that only organizations and fellows work with each other who actually have a mutual interest in this collaboration. Then, over the course of the fellowship, we offer professional development. As I already mentioned, we have an orientation conference at the beginning of the program, preparing for the journey ahead, where the fellows meet each other, where we also connect them with experts in the field. They will meet with alumni and AIF staff, being prepared for the journey before they then go to their respective host organizations and host sites. We support our fellows throughout the journey. I already mentioned the various mentors that assist our fellows. Fellows can always reach out to us also beyond these regular setup check-in calls and come with whatever needs they have, and we are happy to support and help. A very broad timeline here. I mentioned the orientation in October, where we invite several speakers, where we have workshops, reflection exercises, preparing also for potential cultural shocks and learning more about the development sector. In India, at the last orientation conference in Delhi, for instance, for the current cohort, we also had a dinner at the American ambassador to India. We also had a virtual engagement with the Consul General of India in New York. So we actually meet also with high-level experts and personalities that are also great for the networking of the fellows and for the bridge building between India and the US. Then in February, actually 2 weeks from now, we have our midpoint conference, a thematic conference where the fellows also present their projects and what has been accomplished so far, and where we also reflect on the previous months and prepare for the second half of the fellowship program. And then in July is when we wrap up the fellowship year with a graduation ceremony, where we also have keynote speakers there. The fellows launch their publications. We have a yearbook every year and also creative publications. The fellows present posters of their fellowship projects, and where we invite an audience to actually learn about the fellowships and from the fellows about their projects. Maybe also worth mentioning that many fellows get offers from their host organizations after the fellowship. Also, the American India Foundation itself has grown quite a bit in recent years, and we are also happy to stay in touch with our fellows and also consider them for open positions at the American India Foundation. And having said that, I would pause here and give over to Hamsini. Here are some pictures of her fellowship year, and maybe Hamsini, you can talk a little bit about these pictures that we see here. Thank you.
Thank you, Björn. Yeah, I will start with maybe explaining to folks where I was placed and what that experience was, what my project was, what my experience was, and then I'm happy to go over the pictures that are on the screen here. So I was placed, as Björn said, I was with AIF as part of the fellowship program from 2022 to 2023. And I was placed with the Jharkhand State Livelihood Promotion Society, which is an autonomous entity. So essentially getting funding from the government, but operating autonomous to the government, but it implements the livelihood schemes in India. So there's sort of it's considered a state body, and every state in India has something similar to where I worked in Jharkhand. So my project essentially was to work with their rural self-help groups to essentially design and set up a structure or an entity to sell their products into larger markets. And so the pictures you see here, at least the one on the left with the women and the one in the bottom where we're all sitting in a room, was from one of my first field visits, where I got to sit with them and ask a bunch of questions around, where they're at, what kind of products they produce, what their day-to-day looks like, how much money they earn, do they have disposable income, how much support do they have, what are their hopes, what are their fears, and how can we take all of that and build something that's unique to them. So what was interesting about this project was currently in India, this is a mandate from the government. So most states are already starting to have something similar to what I built out for them last year. So this one was specific to Jharkhand, and so it was named Palash, which is the state flower of Jharkhand. And so my role essentially involved more on the strategic side, designing sort of a human resources structure and a governance structure. And I did so because, as Björn mentioned, we're only there for 10 months. And so being mindful of making sure that this continues after the time of the fellowship itself. So I decided to design something that essentially could last longer, but at the same time, if we could hire folks who were a better fit to kind of take that from, ground to build it off, that would be helpful for the organization and for the women themselves. And so part of my role was strategic, but the other part, which I feel like is the best part of the fellowship, is the opportunity to go visit these women and go visit the field visits, do your field visits, depending on the kind of project you're working on, but really do field visits. So you get to actually see the day-to-day of the beneficiaries that you work with, or the beneficiaries that you're trying to help. And so the picture on the very left was my first focus group discussion with these women in a public school in Jharkhand. So they'd essentially sort of converted the public school into a packaging center, and it was a hub for a few villages, a few surrounding villages. And so these women would come there every day, package up, collect products, collectivize it, sort it, grade it, and then package it, and then send it out to the headquarters. So part of my initial visit was to understand that process and sort of get to know them as well. So what was really exciting for me when I took this project was that it was working with the government. I'd never worked in a governmental entity before or with the government before. And if anybody who's part of the development sector knows that they're very big and key stakeholders, specifically when it comes to sustainability. And so I think it was helpful to, one, get an exposure to how they work, but two, also learn. That was a very big learning curve for me, is to understand how they work and what's the best way for someone who doesn't have that background to learn how to build that trust and work with them. And the other sort of big learning for me was when you go on the field for a fellowship, nothing goes your way. I mean, you only have 10 months and you're going somewhere, you're going into a very new environment. Even though I identify being of Indian origin, there was still quite a bit of culture shock because I had never been outside of a bigger city up until the fellowship. And I was also working with a community that I had not interacted with before. And so I think there's a lot of learning curve just in terms of like, how do you learn how to build that trust, how to build that relationship from the get-go and continue to maintain it throughout the time of the fellowship, but at the same time design your role and your project in a way that makes sense to them, that actually brings out a result that is a good fit for them. And C, most important of all, was like sustainability. So after your time as a fellow, if you don't intend to stay, especially, how can you make sure that the work that you've done continues, and there's ownership, most importantly, from the folks who gain from it. So those were sort of my three key learnings. And the other very, I guess, dear to my heart piece was that you gain a lot of friends through the fellowship. And so the top two pictures you see to the right are all co-fellows, and we have a chance, as Bjorn mentioned earlier in the presentation, to meet 3 times during the fellowship. So you meet at orientation, and then you meet at midpoint, and then you meet at endpoint. And all of these 3 sort of meetings happen at different locations in India. So you get to also travel, see new places, do fun activities, explore the country. And so these fellows are important. Like these fellows become sort of your lifelong friends. And I would say nobody understands the experience of a fellowship other than a fellow. And so after I returned back to the US, I was very intent on sort of keeping those connections, because it's tough to find someone who can relate to that experience of being on the ground for so long, going through that up and down of a learning curve that the fellowship is, the sort of changes both personally and professionally that happen when you go through the fellowship journey as a fellow. And so my co-fellows are very important part of my life. And actually now I'm working on a project to set up a peer mentor program between the AIF alumni and the current fellows. And so you also get to sort of meet a whole bunch of people across the years, because the fellowship has been now ongoing for almost 20 years, a little over 20 years. So you get to meet people from across different, years that they've done the fellowship, thematic areas they worked in. And so gives you a lot of access to sort of networking, organizations, even just exposure to what is and what is not part of the development field and where you'd like to go in terms of your career. And the picture that's at the rightmost bottom is essentially the kids who were kids of the women that we were speaking to as part of the focus group discussion, who were also part of our field visits initially, at least the first one. And so they're all part of this. They were all part of the sort of enterprise or SAGs as part of the women themselves. And so we got to also speak with them to hear how the SAG formation and what we're doing helps them with their sort of day-to-day lives as well. So your impact is far-reaching is why I brought that up. So it's not just working with your beneficiaries, but sort of the secondary impact that it creates on the field. That's sort of all from my experience, but I'll pass over to Bjorn. I'm happy to add anything, Bjorn, but happy to wait for the Q&A as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I actually took so many acts, and one of them, what I also wanted to mention, since you mentioned you're also working on this mentoring piece with the alumni now. So this is actually also something worth mentioning. We offer something called the 11th month of service project. So our fellows can actually, after their fellowship, they can also apply with a project proposal, which Hamsini did. And as she mentioned, she's working on this right now. So this is one additional component of the program. Also, I wanted to mention, I mean, since Hamsini mentioned the co-fellows, and the friendships that were established, this is actually something that is not only unique to Hamsini, it's actually something that our alumni tell us on a regular basis, that they are actually still in touch with the fellows, and that these lifelong friendships have developed during the fellowship. And this, is of course nice after the fellowship, but during the fellowship, it's also a fantastic support network. I mean, Hamsini, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know, when challenges were coming up, fellows would not only reach out to the various mentors and the fellowship team, but also within, the fellow network, there are WhatsApp groups, and, fellows also supporting each other. And as Hamsini said, since even though the placements are different, the projects are different, and some fellows are in urban areas, others are in rural areas, still they go through a similar experience in the sense of everything is new. And as Hamsini also said, nothing gets your way. I think that's also an important aspect. Sometimes, especially at the beginning of the fellowship, some fellows are maybe a bit impatient, or they have a certain idea, of course, how their project will have an impact. And sometimes things go a bit slower than expected, and so it is also a very normal experience for our fellows that they arrive with a certain idea, but then things also turn out to be very different. So I was very grateful when Hamsini also mentioned that nothing goes your way, or how you expect things to go. So that's also normal, something that also our alumni tell us when looking back at the fellowship, or also later on in the fellowship, they actually realize how much of an impact they have, even though it might be different from what they thought about impact in the beginning. And just by the very present, by the presence of the fellow at the organization, and through this exchange that is happening, there's already more of an impact as oftentimes is thought of in the beginning. So I also wanted to mention that. Also appreciate that Hamsini said you can actually design your own role. So when our host organizations apply for the program with project proposals, this is like a first draft of the project. And then at the very beginning of the fellowship, our fellows, together with their host organization, will actually further develop this project. And and they can really be creative and free to make something out of their role, and have a say in the project design. And this adjusted project is then also a great document for us to, see how the fellows are doing, how the progress is happening within the project, and so on. So yeah, these are just a few things that came to mind when I heard Hamsini talking. So thank you so much for sharing this. I'm sure probably the audience will have some additional questions. I also wanted to make sure to share our contacts here. This is our email address. Feel free to reach out. Even if after the session you might have some questions that come up, you can always, reach out, and we are happy to answer your questions. So I'm just looking into our chat. You can add your questions, whether it is YouTube or LinkedIn you're joining from. You can add your questions in the chat, and then we can address them. Maybe in the meantime, Hamsuni, since you already mentioned the 11th month of service project, how has it been for you, post fellowship? It still feels like yesterday that you graduated, even though it's now quite a long time ago already. But how have you been? How was the?
Yeah, it's funny because I was chatting with an alumna from sort of a very earlier cohort yesterday, and I met her during the orientation mix-up that we had in Delhi. But it feels it's crazy to think that it's already been a year and some change since that time. So it feels like I adjusted the fellowship. But after the fellowship, what I ended up doing was coming back into the development sector. I have a background in social entrepreneurship and impact investing, so I sort of chose to stay within that area. I did feel like access to finance is still a very big piece and a big piece of development, but also a very big challenge, specifically for women's livelihoods. And so I now work with Apt Associates as part of their private capital team, leading the innovative finance and blended finance initiatives for the firm. But after the fellowship, I think it's been really interesting because I've definitely leaned into the community. I've definitely been trying to make friends. I stay in DC, and so there's a DC chapter for AIF. So that's another piece to add in terms of the access you get to other alumni, but also network outside of the fellowship once you're done. Is the DC chapter or chapters within your city essentially will be connected to other organizations within the city. They also organize events from time to time. They meet up, and so you get to meet new people all the time. Stay either within the sector or branch out. You kind of get to explore the diversity within the sector. But yeah, after the fellowship, I would say my primary goal has been to stay connected with the community. So I've been meeting as many people as I can, and even through the 11th month of service sort of proposal, I've had a chance to meet other fellows who've done their fellowship when the fellowship was started. So I spoke to someone who did it in 2002, and her experience was very different from, let's say, someone who did it in 2015, and then I who did it in 2022. So I think it's been really helpful to lean into that and sort of see how we can support each other, but also how can we strengthen that engagement that we have with each other. So that's been my main focus since the fellowship.
Yeah, thank you. I also mentioned the senior fellows and the curated sessions that they are organizing. I mean, this is maybe another example of how our alumni can also stay engaged. These sessions on various topics. We've also announced them via our alumni platform and have invited our alumni to join. So we also try to create different opportunities to stay in touch with the fellowship team, with AIF, and also with the alumni community in general. I see there's one question about recommendations for dealing with student loans. Does the program have any aid or coverage for loans? So we do not cover loans, but I see this is Mehdi. Mehdi, if you can maybe also reach out to my email address, I can try to find out some additional information and can then provide that accordingly. But the program itself does not cover for loans. But with regards to recommendations, I'm happy to look further into it, and then maybe we can take this offline and communicate via email or set up a meeting. If there are any additional questions, feel free to add them. Let's maybe wait for another minute if there are more questions coming in. If not, you see our email addresses here. Feel free to reach out to us. As mentioned in the beginning, this is our last live info session, and the deadline is February 20th. So there's still some time left. And could you share more information about matching with your NGO and what it was like developing your role as a fellow? Yeah, I think this refers to you, Hamzini.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Cora. So in terms of matching with my host organization, so it's a pretty rigorous process. And so we started interviewing, I would say, so you submit your application, I think earlier in the year, and then you have, I don't remember the exact timelines, but you submit your application earlier in the year, or I would say even the previous year. And then your interviews are around March or April. And then once you do that, you get a chance to sort of prioritize and speak with a couple of your host organizations first as sort of a, get to know you, but also sensitize yourself to what they do. And I would say I really enjoyed and was a very valuable piece of the process, because I think it's very important you will know just from that meeting if it's a good fit for you or not. Because I did walk into some meetings where I felt, okay, this may not be, and if you're being transparent and honest with yourself, then you would say, okay, this is not, I may not be the right person to do this for them. But I think it's also important from the perspective of like starting to build that trust and that relationship from the get-go. So you will know in that first meeting if this is going to be a good fit or not. And I really valued that process because I did have some challenges with my host organization, but despite that, I think the reason I chose mine was because of the fit of the project itself. For me, for the thematic area, and also for the area of expertise that I had. And so I feel like from that sense, it was one of the best experiences I've ever had. The fellowship was one of the best experiences I've ever had in my life, at least in terms of the kind of work that I did on field. So in terms of the matching itself, so you essentially go through your application process. During the interviews, you can speak to the team, and they will also, I think there's a question, correct me if I'm wrong, Bjorn, but there's like questions to gauge sort of what your priorities are in terms of your host organizations. And then after your interview, you do get a document that essentially outlines all of the host organizations and a description of what they do and what project they want to sort of host for the coming year. And then you can sort of go through that, pick your top 3, and once you pick your top 3, then you start having those conversations. So you actually, if possible, you can meet with them in person, depending on your location. But because I was stateside, so I did all of my meetings virtually, and I was able to sort of come to a good understanding and make a good pick based on the conversations I had. In terms of what was it like developing my role as a fellow, so that's a little bit more ambiguous and tricky. So for me, I was working with a governmental entity, and so you go in, I think, with a certain level of expectations, both for yourself and for what this experience would be and your host organization would be. But I think that's what I meant by nothing goes your way. Like, I think from the get-go, you start to realize, oh, okay, that's maybe not the case, right? You start to make those adjustments start to happen. Like, okay, what you thought versus what's actually happening on field are not matching. And so you start to make sort of those adjustments from the get-go. But I think for me, it was really important because it was a governmental entity and I was only going to be there for 10 months. I knew I wasn't going to stay with the host organization after my time as a fellow. It was very important for me to make sure that the work I was doing was continuing after my time as a fellow. And so what I tried to do essentially was, okay, what other groups already exist? Like, my host organization had already partnered with other entities who would stay on longer than I will. And so how can we leverage sort of those groups? I found, champions within the organization who believed in the project, wanted to move it forward, and could do so after my time as a fellow. But The ambiguous and tricky part is that I think it requires a lot of communication, but also like trust and cooperation on both sides, because you will need to design your role in a way that's feasible to accomplish in the 10 months. And you'll realize, because the fellowship is such a roller coaster, that when you go down there, there's a big culture shock. You have to you're adjusting to a new place, you're trying to set up your routine, find your apartment, all of that stuff is going on your personal side. Find community, find friends, try to adjust to a new environment. And then on the work side, trying to get used to a new work culture, understanding the project, understanding what's already done, finding the right gaps, going on the field. So it's a very sort of holistic but strenuous process, at least initially for the first 3 months, when you're trying to understand. And I would actually say, like, as after having done the experience, it took me 2.5 months to 3 months to actually just even understand, okay, this little piece is what makes sense for me over the next 10 months, because that's what's most feasible to do, most feasible to operationalize in 10 months, but at the same time make sure that it is taken on by the community and or the host organization and continues after your time as a fellow. So I would say, when you're designing your role, like, look for feasibility, look for, okay, is this a good match? Can you actually make a difference by taking on this specific scope of work? And then, do you have allies, both within the host organization, but also within the community to continue, like, to keep it going? And then, of course, think of, like, how can it be sustainable after your time as a fellow, unless you do plan to come back and stay. Like Bjorn gave an example of a co-fellow, Erin, from my cohort, who she's actually now back at her host organization, still leading the work that she had done on the ground. In her case, that's very different, because she now still has a chance to mold that piece, continue to mold that piece, but it's not that case for me. So I would say, sort of, definitely keep in mind the sustainability piece as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anthony. And as you said in the end, it's also very much depending on the respective project, and the individual placement. So it is also a bit different for every fellow. However, something that I also wanted to mention, in addition to what Anthony said about the matching process, I already said that, it's not always the first choice that is possible. However, sometimes it's also, as Anthony said, you meet with these host organizations, and then you might be surprised, how much it is of a good fit, or vice versa, So sometimes even your own preferences can change, or sometimes we had fellows who could only be matched with their third choice, and then in the end they said that was actually the best thing that could happen. So things might go differently than expected. And since something also mentioned, of course, there's a lot going on, especially in the beginning. You have to get some orientation and also find housing. About that part, I just wanted to mention that at the very beginning, the first few weeks of the fellowship, actually the host organization will organize accommodation. And then depending on where in India you are, the American India Foundation has wide networks where we can also support, with finding housing. Oftentimes it's the host organization itself that is the best source of getting information where in this area you can find housing. But as with all the other aspects, we are always there to support. But for the housing bit, it's actually at the end of the day, it's the choice of the fellow where they would like to live, and we will support and can also cover the broker fees. I think, question-wise in the chat, I don't see any new ones. Not sure if there was anything in addition, Hamsini, that you want to mention, but I think we covered quite a bit.
I think I was thinking, Bjorn, actually, it may be helpful to tell them about, like, from your perspective, about the interview process itself.
Oh yeah, so maybe some tips about the interviews. That's a very good point. So I think generally, speaking, what is always a good advice is to be authentic. I know it might be easier said than done, because everyone, of course, in an interview is nervous, and we know about this, and we also take this into consideration, that candidates can be nervous in an interview. But try to be authentic, and also do a little research on the program, on the American India Foundation as such. We mentioned quite some crucial points about the program, including our motto, serve, learn, lead. So it's good advice to reflect a little bit about that, to think about how far does it make sense for you, that through service on the ground, you will have a learning experience that will actually also contribute to your leadership skills. It is service leadership program. So again, what does it mean to you, and how far does this fellowship fit in your overall trajectory? Why is it that you would like to do this fellowship at this point in your life, is a question that we will definitely ask. And if we can then tell that someone really looked into the program, read some blogs, that's another recommendation I would like to share. On our website, our fellows publish blogs about their fellowship experience. We mentioned several times that the experience is very different for everyone, because they work in different projects and are placed in different places in India. So it is definitely worth going through some of the blogs and think about maybe certain questions you have, or maybe some project that stands out to you that you could also very well imagine for yourself. Mentioning these kinds of things in the interview is definitely a big plus, and will probably also impress the selection panel if you show them that you know what the American India Foundation is about, what our fellowship program is about, and then having some knowledge about what the fellows have done in the past and how that could fit in your own trajectory. So these are some of the tips I can think of. Hamsini, how was the interview for you back then? I tried to remember if I was sitting.
No, I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to remember. I would say, like, I was prepared. I knew why I was doing I was very clear on why I was doing the fellowship at that specific time in my life, and why I wanted a specific kind of project, and why it'd be a good fit for it. So from like a technical operational perspective, I was very clear, but I did go into and I was prepared for other sort of questions that, a typical interview would ask for. But I would say with AIF, you should also be prepared for sort of some surprise questions. I think the one that was asked for my cohort was like, what part of a bicycle would you be? Was that the question?
Oh yeah, I don't even remember that one, but yeah, you're right.
So you may get questions like that, which you may or may not be prepared for. So I would say, like, just it's okay if I don't think I answered everything very confidently. I don't remember at least having answered all of the questions very like assuredly. But I would say just go in like with a little bit of an open mind, because you may have to think quick on your feet. And some of these questions, there's not like a right or wrong answer. I think they're just trying to understand your thought process, right? And like understand who you are as a fellow. So there's no like right or wrong answer. But just give yourself that space to, like, even if you don't know, take a few minutes to think about it, and then give the answer in the interview. But outside of that, I think the interview is also a great opportunity for you to ask the team any questions you have, because it's just as much as they're interviewing you. I think it's a good opportunity for you to ask them about the fellowship, about what the experience is going to be like, what, they've seen cohorts of people go through this. So, maybe what they've learned from seeing some of these fellows go through. I think that was one of my questions I remember for the program head at the time. And so, just give yourself also use that space as an opportunity to learn the team as well, and learn about the fellowship from the team as well. So it's not just them interviewing you, it's also your opportunity to ask them questions.
Yes, I think that's a very important point. And speaking of advice and tips for the interviewer, having prepared some questions is definitely something that I would also recommend. So that's also something where you can stand out as a candidate. I mean, as Hamsini said, it's a great opportunity to get to know the team, to learn more about the program. So being active and asking questions is actually a very big plus, also something that stands out about candidates. And in the selection panel, I mean, obviously the program team will be there, and typically we also invite 1 or 2 alumni, and maybe also donors sometimes join in. There will be a maximum of 5 people in the interview. However, we try to have a mix of different stakeholders in the selection panel as well. And there's one more question here in the chat about the application portal that is set up in a way so that you cannot see the next question. That is true, it is different slides. However, as long as you haven't submitted your application, you can still go back and adjust the answers that you have entered in the previous page. There is a section for a CV that you can upload that is actually new. That wasn't the case last year, but you can actually also upload a CV. And then in the very end, you will have 3 short essay questions of, don't know the exact word count now, but it's short essays where, similar to what Hamsini said earlier about surprising questions in the interview, it's not so much about a right or wrong answer. It is also about us getting a feeling about the creativity of a candidate, you know, how they would approach an unknown situation. So feel free to be creative with these questions and don't overthink it in the way that, you know, we would have one specific answer in mind, because that's not the purpose of these essay questions. But yeah, Mehdi, I hope I answered this. So on the portal, when you go through the application, you can always go back and adjust your answers as long as you haven't submitted the application yet. Okay, I think at this point we can maybe also wrap it up. Please, take note of our contacts here. Again, very special thanks to Hamsini. Amazing that you joined us, and it's always, I think, the best way for our candidates to also learn about the program when hearing from an alumni. So thank you so much for joining today, and for all the support you give us in the program. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So we look forward to receiving your applications, and please reach out with any questions you might have. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.